Well, welcome back. I apologize for the sound outside. Let me just make sure it is actually recording sound and not doing that thing it did last time. Excellent. Apologize for the sound outside. I think they are chopping down every tree within a 100-kilometer radius for some reason. So you'll hear chainsaws in the background, followed by the occasional house moving thump. But I would rather get it out of the way now than leave you hanging for a few extra hours or even a day until they stop. So, PHIL385 585, Week 8, Part 1. This is going to be a very short lecture. And by short, I mean maximum 40 minutes. This will be my last lecture. Sandy will take the second half of this lecture, picking up from where I leave off. But where we got to last lecture. See what I did there? Equivocation? Never mind, anyway. This is the last lecture on the topic, and Sandy will take the next 3 or 4 lectures to fill out the unit. Also, last lecture, we looked at the functioning game theory as it works, equilibrium points, and some of the possible limitations, like multiple equilibrium points or no equilibrium points, like in rock, paper, scissors. Now, the last lecture today and now is the methodology of game theory itself. All right, the methodology and the groundwork for its inception in the first place, and why we might want to use models and so forth. I will warn you, I'm almost certain now these unit notes were written up by Accardi-Blinov, because von Neumann and Morgenstern are, as far as I can tell, 2 of Accardi's heroes in philosophy. And this is very much von Neumann and Morgenstern heavy. By the way, I love equivocations, as you can probably see in that first slide. Now, von Neumann and Morgenstern. I do not know how to pronounce von Neumann's name. I think it's von Neumann. Properly. Doesn't matter, as long as you know who I'm talking about. Now, the famous book which launched game theory was the Theory of Games and Economic Behavior in 1944. Now, contrary to the title, it is not a theory of phenomena, but a theory of decision-making in interactive situations. And this will come out further on when we look at what it takes to develop something into a science, and why game theory shouldn't be a theory of phenomena per se. It is a mathematical model that is being used in application, in this case with economics. So, theory requires a few things: agents who are ideally rational, possess a complete and consistent set of preferences, have ideal knowledge of all relevant facts, and part of their ideally rational being is perfect computational power. Let's keep separate the real versus the ideal. Unit Notes hedges their bets by suggesting that if these qualities rarely, if ever, come together. Geez, that's bad. Forgive that. By suggesting that scratch if. These qualities rarely, if ever, come together in one single agent. Oh, I missed it. Blind spots. Never mind. Now, I would go further and say that not only rarely occurred, or not only that they never occur, but will never occur. Let me start that one again. It's not that they are just rare occurrences in nature. I want to say that they are impossible occurrences in nature, and will continue to be impossible occurrences in nature. Such an agent simply does not exist and cannot exist. That's my position on this. But I'm fairly comfortable with this. If you can find an exception to this rule, great. But I don't think you will. I think we are limited and fallible, and will never satisfy the qualities necessary for Homo economicus. But that doesn't mean I can simply reject the theory built on them out of hand. Now, we've been doing this a lot. We say, oh, this is unrealistic, how can we fix it? Can we reject it simply because it's unrealistic? And in this instance, we definitely cannot just throw it away out of hand simply because the agent is fictional, doesn't actually exist. This is the best example I see in the unit notes, that perfect triangles never appear in the real world either. But it would be ludicrous to reject geometry for this reason. Absolutely ludicrous. And if we think about why, geometry is a very useful tool in the real world. Even though we may never see a perfect triangle, the ability to calculate with perfect triangles translates really well into the real world when dealing with triangle-like objects. They are sufficiently similar. The engineer makes another appearance here. Remember we were talking about the engineer before? It is not claimed to be a perfect representation, but near enough for practical purposes. Sorry, it's a very hot day and I'm trying to stay hydrated. Geometry and game theory both only claim to present mathematical tools that are sufficiently similar to help with real-world applications. There may be no perfect representation of the game theoretical agent or homo economicus or whatever, just like there may be no perfect triangles in the real world, and they just do not exist. There are abstract triangles, there's triangulation, there are 3 points in space that, if connected, would make a perfect triangle, but they are not a perfect triangle, they are 3 points in space. These mathematical tools are often referred to as models, and as the name implies, they model reality rather than govern it like laws do. Laws are things like the law of relativity in physics. All right? These are what we currently accept as the framework of the universe. It's not that these... there's something that these laws are pointing to that is the truth of the matter. Now, these may be overturned, but when they're overturned, we overturn them. And they are no longer accepted. They are not meant to simply emulate reality. They are allowing us to determine the fundamental principles of reality. So we separate our models from our laws in this way. When a model reaches a certain point that it affects the discipline it belongs to the point where it is making vastly accurate predictions on things that are very novel and non-intuitive, then we might want to start pushing the model into the realm of law. But not before. Let's not jump the gun. So, why a model? Models are substitute for real life, when the real life equivalent is far too complicated. Okay, need another row in that too. Jeez, my editing is shocking. Complicated to realistically represent with a fully fledged theory or law. Models can be built on slowly to eventually arrive at a theory that does accurately represent reality, at which point it starts to become less a model, pardon me, and more a law. Now, this isn't always the case. Some models can be constructed. Many are in terms of astrophysics, but when they're talking about these sorts of models, they're actually talking about much more in the traditional sense of models, when they're working out how bodies work, what's influencing them. If a wobble is detected in a planet that shouldn't necessarily be there, we wonder what's going on. Maybe there is another planet influencing it somewhere. Maybe that planet is outside of our perceived realm. Maybe we can't see it with current technology or so forth. So we model it as if it was the case that this extra planet was here. And we model game theory as if people were acting as these perfectly rational agents. And we do this for simplicity's sake. And we can build on it slowly. The only reason to do the former, which is model real life simply, is if the model already holds enough similarity to reality to be worth building a theory on. Otherwise, we may want to build a theory directly from reality. Well, a model can be seen as a theory forming, very newborn theory forming from reality, but it is reduced to a point that it is manageable, and we can build on it from there. Why do we really use models? Well, there's the ideal formulation and use of models, but we like models because they're useful, which is even more important than the similarity their assumptions share with the real world. We hope to use models to gain some new knowledge of the real world. We reduce something to its very core components and even unrealistic and impossible components to try and generate prediction or explanation, if not prediction. And then we can fill in the blanks after the fact. My housemate coming back, just ignore the sound of the door. We can represent things in a standardized way with a mathematical model, so that the connections may be drawn between models, and the results can be compared using the same model in different situations and different scenarios, changing one thing here or there to see what happens with the model being used as the lens to interpret the results of the data we stick in. So models are useful. They can definitely be useful. How do we judge a model then if the assumptions have no bearing on reality? If they are intentionally abstract? Well, if its similarity to the real world is not something we want to judge a model on, then only the results matter, both in their accuracy and how useful they are. Now, how useful doesn't necessarily mean just in this one observation. It can mean how useful it is in a broad spectrum of disciplines that are tackling with phenomena that this model itself has explanations for. And we can see this with things like game theory being used in psychology, economics, social, and so on. Just there's numerous things that game theory is being applied to. Does this mean it's a good theory? Well, if it generates good, useful information and novel observations, then yeah. If it doesn't, well, then this application in multiple disciplines may prove that it isn't something we want to hold to. Now, we'll take economics as an example. A specific problem in economics. The agent's choices are not the only factor in determining the results or the outcomes of those choices. They are interdependent. The interdependency of choices provides the ultimate result. The decisions of everybody comes together to decide the ultimate result. Now, Keynes had his beauty pageant idea in economics, where when we invest, it is like entering a beauty pageant where we don't pick the person who we think is the most beautiful. We pick the person who we think the most people will think is the most beautiful. Because the results are not determined by us alone. The results are determined by the collective actions of everyone. That sounds a little abstract, but in investments, we want to back the horse that everyone backs, because that's the best way to do it. Now, that is a very gross oversimplification of the entire thing, but in essence, if nobody backs an enterprise, it's not going to do as well as if there is tons of interest in it. So anyway, the results of those decisions are not dependent on the person's choice alone, nor even the collection of people in that instance. It is the industries themselves and so on. Now, game theory as a model is uniquely equipped to deal with just this problem. It's been built for it, built to help identify and solve the interdependency problem. So why might we think mathematical representations of economic situations is a good idea. Until the 1940s, it had not yet proved itself in economics at all. We had tried a bunch of things to make economics more mathematical. None of them stuck. They didn't produce any significant results. The model in this instance, the model allows us to formulate our theory clearly, also allows the standardization of empirical information. And finally, this particular model works better than some of the previous attempts, as I just said. Now you need to identify your problem in order to do this. This point, von Neumann and Morgenstern raised the very good point. We need to clearly identify the problem we face in order to formalize a method for its solution. Models in this regard come after a problem has been proposed. Game theory was a response to an economic problem that has since been used much more broadly. Many different things, just decision making in general. Now, the argument is, why game theory in economics is put forth by von Neumann and Morgenstern? They claim economics is still a young science, much like all of the social sciences are, and it will go through developmental stages on its way to a more developed science, like physics. And there are 4 stages to the development of a formal science, or what we currently recognize as the natural sciences, physics, chemistry, and so on. Now these 4 stages are proposed as the preliminary stage, the corroboratory application, or corroborating applications, I should say, advanced application, and genuine prediction. Now economics and most of the social sciences haven't got to genuine prediction yet. For anyone doing an economics degree, I'm very sorry, but it's the truth. As well as psychology, not into genuine prediction yet. There are predictions made, but the error levels are still way too high. We can't predict it like we can predict gravity, for example. Now the preliminary stage, this is the transitional step from pre-mathematical observation to mathematization. For economics, this would be accomplished by Paul Samuelson, not von Neumann and Morgenstern. And it's accomplished by identifying the problem in economics. This was agent preference selection for Samuelson in his 1939 paper, I think? That was the famous start, anyway. This first stage may only result in simple connections with the immediately observable, and it may provide little to no practical significance. But once you have identified that problem, how do we decide preferential selections and so forth, we can then start to think about ways of solving that problem. And, as you have seen, this particular problem is simply has blossomed into expected utility theory since then. Physics has had a preliminary stage too. Everything does. We look at Isaac Newton with the conception of gravity. And by the way, there is a visual aid for anybody who has wandered away and trying to escape looking at the slides. I think this one's great. I had to give you a retrieval information because it's rather more unique than my previous visual aids that I haven't built myself. Now, what von Neumann and Morgenstern propose is that we must divide the difficulties. When we focus on one thing, we must downplay other difficulties in order to get to the heart of this one thing. We put in only the simplest of assumptions in an attempt to get something that allows for basic mathematical treatment. Newton's initial assumptions left out everything but gravity. Air resistance was simply assumed away. It was incomplete and unrealistic, but it was a model for how the world works. And even though it by itself did produce some substantial evidence to back it up and so forth, it could also be developed on. It was assumed down to its most simplest form and grown from there. you don't start with the moderately complex. You start with the very simple and build from there if you're trying to build a science. If you're just trying to build an idea in an existing science, sure, you already have the foundations. But in something like physics, and as many of the social sciences have done, they are formalizing their core assumptions and building from there. Gravity. Air resistance can come later. Now, corroboration. Once we have a significantly general mathematical theory, we can move on to corroborating applications. Now, what the hell does this mean? We can try and apply it to other areas which already have explanations that are well known. In this way, we can test the model against known quantities. When it is found to coincide with results we would definitely expect, we can say that the model has been corroborated. These observable outcomes can be explained in a new way through this model, or explained in the way of the model, but that's kind of pointless if we're trying to discover new information. Gravity, for example, hypothesized on this planet, then applied to the celestial bodies in our solar system. It was hypothesized that it is gravity that keeps the planets locked to the sun and moving around and so forth. And we later discovered, not quite as simple as that, it's actually space distortion, which is what gravity is, distorting space, because gravity, anyway, it's weird. It's not so much that gravity is a force like magnetism. Gravity is a force more like distorting the fabric of space, which actually is more like, anyway, no, never mind. The point is, the oversimplification of the model offers an explanation for the celestial bodies. It can be improved on further and actually even revised completely. But now we're getting into Popperian scientific validation versus Kuhn's theory of paradigm shifts, and even into Lakatos. I think Accardi would approve of those. He's a big fan of Lakatos as well. But we move on in what we can explain to corroboratory evidence. When we see the celestial bodies moving, we know what they'll do. Even before there was a description of gravity, there was simply so much empirical evidence that we knew how the planets moved. We just didn't know why. So we apply the model of gravity to the planets, make some other little hypothesis about what's going on up there, starting to make more predictions. We're corroborating our model. Now, when we apply this in an advanced way, we are now attempting to turn our model to more open questions and more applicable situations. We're testing it, trial by fire. And I think this, somewhere between corroboratory application and advanced application, is where most of the social sciences probably fit at this point. The results may not necessarily be known in the new application, thus the model will generate a degree of novel and sometimes non-obvious outcomes. It will give us answers that perhaps we weren't expecting. This requirement for novelty is where the mathematical model starts claiming to contribute new knowledge to the discipline in question. So, if our theory of games starts to provide novel information, new information that is counterintuitive, non-obvious, doesn't even have to be counterintuitive, it's just non-obvious outcomes, and does it more accurately than we would assume, then we should start to be impressed. And this is where prisoner's dilemma comes in. So think long and hard about this particular application of game theory, prisoner's dilemma, when it comes to the point of where does game theory fit in this advancement stage in terms of development. It may just belong to economics, but it can be applied to anything that it can be applied to, with the interplay and interdependency problem between agents. There's a good argument to be made that this, and possibly the previous stages, is where game theory is at the moment. But the final stage is prediction, genuine prediction. Now we move on to predicting future situations. The mathematical models, and thus the disciplines that can leverage it, also get elevated here. game theory generates predictions. Are they good ones? This is what you have to ask yourself. Have we got to this point yet? Genuine predictions. We can be really accurate here. Is game theory really accurate? Most tests say no. It's not really accurate. It generates some pretty good outcomes, but most repeat experiments aren't as accurate as we would like to qualify as a science, a natural science levels of accuracy. That's just not how it's happening. And if we're not there yet, we're not a genuine science yet, according to von Neumann and Morgenstern. Gives us an explanation and prediction of complex situations, but is it genuinely accurate in its predictions? I think it's safe to say no, not yet. In the same way that economics and psychology and all of the other social sciences at this point are not genuinely accurate in their predictions yet. We're still figuring it out, and that's great. We're on the new frontier of science still. We can't just assume we have all the answers without the evidence to back it up. Hell, we're still on the frontier of physics, both macro and quantum. So, we should be humble about what we know and what we do not know. Can we use game theory today? Sure we can. We can investigate it, we can push it forward, and we can see how far it goes. So we are applying it to rationality and decision making in general. If it holds up, great. It's already making some pretty novel observations and explanations of the situations. I'm liking my Asians at the moment. So certainly, most of the social sciences are not at the level of laws in physics yet. So, where on the timeline of stages do you think game theory sits? Or even economics, for that matter? Or any of the social sciences? I use economics because von Neumann and Morgenstern used economics in their examples. So, very, very quick lecture. Geez, I think that's only about 25 minutes. But there's going to be a long intermission. And by that I mean it's probably not going to be up today. Might not even be up tomorrow. Might be up Friday. Might even be up on the weekend. Whenever Sandy has the time to do it. He's very busy at the moment. But that's it for me. You don't have to listen to me anymore. I do apologize that this lecture was more of a history lesson than on game theory itself. I'm sure I'm sure everyone is horrified that I didn't have more graphs and maths and formula for you to digest with glee. And this was more just on theory and development. Sandy will post part 2 of this week's lecture sometime in the future. Please give him some, what do we call it? Give him some, I say here, cut him some slack, but give him a bit of time. He's got a lot of things on his plate at the moment. Everyone has a lot of things on their plate at the moment. It's coming up to Christmas, and the university weeks run right up to it. So trying to organize all sorts of things outside of university while still having a full workload takes its toll. Anyway, so please, bear in mind that current events are probably going to stall it, possibly. If he gets it up in time, even better. But that will be a superhuman feat. So, it has been a pleasure. Take care of yourselves, and please have fun over the holidays. I think you'll only get up to week 9 before we break. You have a week. The best thing you can do with any unit is forget about working on it actively for a little while and let your subconscious mull it over rather than your active conscious, because your subconscious can do things that your active mind just isn't capable of. Alright, that's it. Only 30 minutes. I'm quick. It's not that it was short, but, well, it is short, but that's that. Alright, have fun.